Hello comic book fans, here's Earl Grey and this is Richard Corben, or rather was in his younger days. Now he's 77, I kid you not, it's unbelievable, and he's still doing wonderful comics like Shadows on the Grave, recently collected from Dark Horse in a wonderful little hardcover. He still writes, draws and inks his stuff while his daughter colors, or rather adds these very impressive and precise shades of grey. And his wife serves as an editor or manager, a nice little family business there that Mr. Corben has going. He's doing comics for almost 50 years now and has achieved to be generally acknowledged as a classic master. And you don't question his status for 1 second when you read Shadows on the Grave. Bone-dry horror comics, short and precise, new riffs on old EC horror comic tropes, full of chills, fantasy and imagination. And his art skills are more sharp than ever. Actually, sharp is not the first word that comes to my mind to describe Corben's art, especially his characters. They rather seem soft, made out of some pliable material like bubblegum. These bubblegum characters were one reason why Corben's stories have always been recognizable. The other reason was his way of coloring with airbrush, which adds to the 3D softness of his characters. Actually, he uses a lot of stuff to color, but I don't go that route. Overall, aesthetically, his coloring is very related to the computer coloring that actually came later on. And I remember to have great difficulties with these colors, like I actually still have with a lot of computer coloring. But in comparison, nowadays, Corben's coloring looks amazingly handmade and fresh. And of course, no one ever has used color in this versatile and trippy way before or after. Okay, with the exception of Brendan McCarthy or Lorenzo Mattotti and some others, maybe, but no one would confuse one of these with Corben because they are all very unique and special. But the much younger me really had some problems with Corben's comics. I found them very fascinating, mind you, if not for something else, because of all the nudity in it. On the other hand, some of his panels were just too loud, apparently clumsy and over the top. They seemed very American to me, like these giant old American cars in super shiny colors with a lot of chrome and fins and super soft suspension. Somehow gloriously tasteless. So it's mind-boggling to me how this guy could eventually become, in my mind, the distinguished master of classic comic art that he is today, without having changed his art style. Some of his characters are even more bubblegummy than ever. So while Corben just has refined and improved his skills, it's more likely that I have changed and have eventually developed enough sense to dig Corben's comics without any reluctance or doubt. In fact, he's now one of my favorite cartoonists of all time, and the fact that I know his comics for so long only solidifies his importance for me. But back to the reluctant fascination that Corben's comics had for me when I first saw them in Schwermetall, the German metal hurlant, aka heavy metal. They obviously dealt with issues that were totally relevant for me at that time. For instance, one of the first stories I read from Corben was Dan. That's a colorful, escapist sci-fi story with fantasy elements and whatnot. But at its core, Dan is a coming-of-age story. Not the kind of coming-of-age story that your English teacher got off on, mind you. Not high-minded artsy-fartsy literature bullshit. Not one of those with some characters that are as stupid, uptight and awkward as I was in adolescence. Like every adolescent is in one or the other, if not every phase of this long, awkward transformation process while you're becoming an adult. The least I wanted to read about was something about some loser who was awkward and uptight like me. A book that just mirrored my inconvenient situation. That had no appeal whatsoever for me. No, but a coming-of-age story, Corben style, was literally a different story. The main protagonist of Dan is young David Ellis Norman, who inherited a technical device from his uncle who vanished and was declared dead. The youngster experiments with that device until everything is violet and orange steam. In this steam he walks to become a new strange being with a muscular body, no pimples but an impressive schlong, a male animal with a knack for the ladies. If that sounds pretty one-dimensional and stereotypical to you, well, it is pretty one-dimensional and stereotypical, exactly as one-dimensional and stereotypical as the mind and longing of a boy of that age is. Add a lot of confusion and it would be a good summary of my mindset at that time. Maybe not all of the time back then, but in the phases when the hormones were raging. I would have changed easily my scrawny and meager self for a muscular, lizard-brained entity like Dan. And Corben addresses these issues when he lets David Ellis Norman wonder about his strange new body and how unfamiliar this new situation is. Unfamiliar is the least you can say about Neverwhere, the parallel universe in which Dan strolls. Full of dragons, monsters, LSD-colored mists, and most of all, big-breasted women. Honestly, his ladies have never been beautiful to me. But the excessive supply of TNA doesn't fail eventually to be at least, let's say, interesting to a 15 or 16-year-old boy. But most of all, this is fantastic escapist literature. Stories that take you on a trip, let forget your everyday life as long as you stay in Neverwhere. It's ridiculous rubbish, all right. But it's wonderful, beautiful, spirit-lifting, cathartic fun. Like riding in an oversized blue Ford Thunderbird with huge fins, I suppose. Thanks for listening and watching. Goodbye.